Oh, fuck. We are, in fact, recording. What's going on, everybody? So I've been playing Mordhau recently, and, pretty happy with the game, especially considering I had never even heard about it until after the game had come out, so very happy with it. What I am not happy with, however, is the discussion about the weapons in the game. So I'm not going to waste your time and explain to you what a tier list is, as I'm pretty sure everybody knows what that is by now. And this is a video that is very clearly just bandwagoning on the trend of tier list videos that have been making their way through YouTube for the past couple weeks. And is probably a pretty dead meme by this point, but this is just another one for the pile. Fuck it. I will say that I'm going to be a little bit different with this tier list, in that I'm actually going to try to remain as impartial as possible and avoid giving my opinion, and instead give each weapon its placement in the tier list based on what the community thinks about them. So, try to think of this as a guide for choosing weapons in Mordhau and not looking like a bitch. I will also say that I'm not going to be rating every single weapon in the game, as that will make this list way too long and miserably fucking boring, and no one wants to see that. And I'm also not going to be including weapons such as the throwable turds, which are a clear shot into A tier, just from Horde mode alone. But due to the fact that they are nearly impossible to find in other modes of play, they are simply just not going to make the list because they're not really a part of the discussion. Alright, so as you can see here, we've got all the different tiers, ranging from S all the way down to F, as well as 2 special tiers for weapons that literally no one uses, or are so fucking bad that there's no point in them even being in the game. And also, you can see here, I've made up a couple of labels for some of the weapons. That's just for clarity's sake. And also for the people in the crowd who can't really tell the difference between a tiny little JPEG of a bastard sword and a longsword. And also because if you're the kind of person who could identify every weapon in Mordhau before playing the game, then I can almost assure you that you're the reason I am making this video. Alright, so, the shields now. I'm pretty sure we all already know where the shield's going to wind up on this list. As it's pretty difficult to be able to play this game and not find at least one person constantly complaining about this thing. This encompasses every shield in the game, by the way. If you use a shield in your loadout, the community hates you. It's as simple as that. Next up, we've got ourselves the spear and the short spear. Now, these are pretty self-explanatory, very simple weapons, and also some of the most complained about weapons, or at least the most complained about melee weapons in the entire game, other than probably the rapier, I would guess, although I don't really know why. But very good weapon, great for keeping people at reach. Downsides is that you could pretty much assume what every new player is going to do with one of these things. They're going to thrust. But pretty sure they're a clear shot for F tier. As a side note, I wanted to mention that if you are the kind of person who pairs the short spear with the shield, then you are probably so spineless and useless in combat that you don't have any bones in you at all. Daggers. It's a pretty middling weapon overall. It's a dagger. You know what a dagger does. That being said, I did see somebody complaining about my friend using one of these, so F. Alright, next up comes the Zweihander. Definitely the choice for the knuckle-dragging members of the community. Your KDA, or at least your player's average KDA using one of these things is probably going to read something similar to 1-to-1, but more realistically, that number is going to be even lower because he's going to be killing and cleaving through his own teammates. So, alright, the next up is the Executioner Sword. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, I think this is my least favorite weapon in the entire game, because all I can see with this fucking thing is the absolute min-max going through the heads of the players that are using this. You'll see these guys in full suits of plate armor just swinging away, getting crazy kill counts. I don't know why, but if you're the kind of person who uses the Executioner Sword, and you've armored your head and your chest, but not your legs, then I have this instinctive need to call you a scumfucker. And I don't know why. That being said, I actually don't see the community complaining about this weapon that often, and I imagine that's probably due to the existence of the Zweihander, so it gets a boost for that. Alright, next up is the Evening Star. Good weapon. Very, very classy choice. Definitely can't fault anyone for taking this weapon, and I really like the customization options there are for this weapon. But I've also never seen anyone use this thing ever. So, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't even exist. The Maul, if you complain about this weapon, you have no soul. Next up is the Messer, which is used primarily by me and my mom, and pretty much no one else. So, alright. Next up is the Halberd, otherwise known as the Sophisticated Man's Zweihander. I definitely think this is the perfect weapon for the kind of person who wants to improve at the game, and is the kind of person that actively goes onto dueling servers. However, you're also most likely just going to cleave through your teammates with this thing in frontline. So, better than the Zweihander. The Longsword. It's a good choice. I imagine if you're the kind of person using this thing, you're either incredibly boring in real life, or you find the whole screwing off the pommel thing incredibly funny. Same thing goes with the Bastard Sword, whatever. I think it's probably a little bit better just because you can use it in two hands and not embarrass yourself. Now with the Great Sword, I imagine people are using this thing as like a budget Zweihander. I don't really see the appeal of it, but I also don't see many people complaining about it, so D tier. Next up, we've got the incredibly controversial, the Loot Weapon. If you use this thing on frontline, my instinctive opinion is to wish that you would get hit by a car in the safety of your own home. But every once in a while, you might get me in the right mood, and I might bang my head a little bit. I think we can all agree that the Loot is probably S tier, and that's purely because of the weird amount of respect that people show Loot players in this game. I'm actually going to go ahead and rate the siege weapons together, as I think that my opinion as well as the community's opinion are pretty much the same on these two, and that is to say, who fucking cares? Most of the people using these things probably got sick of them from the tutorial, or they're going to end up picking these things up once, firing it into a large melee, and killing like half of their team in a single hit, in which case they will be promptly criticized, maybe even team killed, and will never want to use one of these things again. I also want to say that the positioning of most of these weapons on the battlefield are usually pretty shitty, not very well made, probably the worst parts of any map that they are featured on, literally unplayable. Alright, the toolbox. Use this thing in order to build walls and spikes, as well as if you go back to the ammo box, you can create a portable little ballista. Now, there's a pretty detailed post... now, if you go on to the Steam community, you can see there's actually a pretty detailed post that somebody made talking about why this thing is actually the probably the most unusable thing in the entire game. So I don't really have an opinion on it, so I'll just default to his or hers. I don't want to assume a gender. I've actually ordered these next three on purpose, as they are probably the three most complained about weapons in the entire game. Starting with probably the most controversial on the list, horses. This thing is pretty much the equivalent to the rocket launcher in Halo, in the fact that you can pick up literally anything in the game and pair it with the horse, and as long as your horse still has health, you're gonna get kills. Your team, their team, doesn't matter. And I do mean any weapon. You can literally pick up a wooden rake and couch it, and you can have the friendly perk and hit your teammate with it, and he is guaranteed dead. Easy F tier. As a side note, as the lance is actually supposed to be paired with the horse, I actually want to make an addendum and say that this thing is actually literally unplayable, as the only purpose of the lance in the game is for people who didn't put a spear or spear-like object into their loadout, as they are effectively worse than the wooden fork or rake in every way, because they just simply does not have a thrusting attack. So, by virtue of that, the wooden fork is actually literally better than the lance. Next up is the rapier, which, as I mentioned before, and as you could probably all agree, is the most criticized weapon in the entire game. And I don't really understand why, because as you probably know, and as everybody probably all knows, new players are going to end up using this thing in one way, and that is to thrust, which means you know how to counter this thing. 9 times out of 10, if you just chamber their thrust, you're gonna get them, and if they are somebody who is just spamming the thrust button, then just transform into a horizontal and you'll get them every time. It's that easy. If I were to keep with the Halo analogy with the rapier, I would probably compare it to the plasma pistol, as pretty much anyone can pick up the plasma pistol and just in the career of anybody who's not really paying attention in like a second, without really putting much effort into it themselves. And worse off, you're going to feel really stupid dying to this thing, and the guy who killed you is going to look really dumb using it also. It just doesn't look cool. So that's obvious F tier. We already know where it's going. And of course, the bows. Now, I'm going to go ahead and shift all of the bows at once into F tier. I would like to add as a personal note onto the bows that pretty much any time I've ever pressed tab to check the score of anybody who's complaining about these things on Frontline, their KDA usually reads like the actual ratio of good players to bad players in this game. But that being said, if you use a bow, obviously very dishonorable. What are you doing? Pick up a sword. Dishonorable mention, of course, goes to the Firebomb for making me have to take the Fireproof perk. Fuck you. Alright, so you can see now here the finish list. I've gone ahead and done the liberty of saving some time and just filling it all in for you. Of course, if your own mental tier list doesn't end up looking something like this, I can assure you there's something wrong with your head. That's because, clearly, we now have a definitive tier list for Mordhau. So what you're going to want to do is to try to main one of these weapons in the top section here if you're trying to actually prove to people how good you are at the game. But if you do need a crutch, then feel free to take something from this lower section down here. Alright, so that's the end of the video. I'll probably have a link to the finished tier list in the description, as well as probably the website that I used to make the tier list. It's just tierlistmaker.com. I guess don't bother subscribing because I'm never making anything like this ever again.